All right. Good morning, everybody. So let me know if you guys can see my screen and hear me. We're going to attempt today to not start talking when I'm just looking at Chrome here. So we're going to try to get the switching correct. That's the goal for today. So I hope you guys are doing well. So welcome. Let's not get the echo. There we go. All right. So I hope you guys are doing well. So if you guys have if you're tuning in for the first time, this is AskZBrush. So this is the Twitch version of AskZBrush. AskZBrush is a thing that we do where if you ask a question on Twitter with the hashtag AskZBrush, I'll go through on a weekly basis, and if any of the questions can be answered in a video format, I'll go through and answer those. And we just created these playlists from these answers on YouTube. So the first playlist of AskZBrush has around 200 videos, and we have now switched to AskZBrush Volume 2. And Volume 2 will be focusing on ZBrushCore R8. So we currently have 17 videos in Volume 2, and then we have another 200 in the first Volume 1 of ZBrush, which was focused on ZBrushCore R7. So the process for this normally is just go to Twitch or go to Twitter and just use the hashtag AskZBrush and post your question. And then I'll just go through and look at these. If you guys are unfamiliar with what ZBrush is, you can find information and also free trials of ZBrush on our website, which is pixologic.com. We only currently have ZBrushCore 8 for the trial version right now, but this is fully functional. You can use it for 45 days for free with no restrictions. Some of the things that I will be showing in this version of AskZBrush and also the Volume 2 stuff will be using ZBrushCore 8. So are some features that may not be available in ZBrushCore R7, but you can at least try it out and see if it fits your pipelines and workflows. So for ZBrush Live 2, we just want to hit on this really quick. So today, after I go, later this evening, Shane Olson is going to be on Twitch here. So definitely tune in and check him out. He's an amazing artist. And also on the 13th, we will have Tony Leonard. And so Tony Leonard is crazy too, another amazing artist as well. And he's so like artistic. I just don't understand how he does it. Like he's always doing these crazy line arts, and now he's doing drawings and comics for all sorts of different magazine stuff. So really, really cool style and extremely fast. He's one of the few people where he draws entirely in a pen and never messes up. It's pretty crazy. All right, so I see my sound is good, and we are coming in loud and clear. So if you guys have questions, so the purpose of the Twitch version of this is that you guys can ask questions to me, and I'll attempt to answer them. Sometimes I don't answer them correctly, and we've only had one occasion where I've given an answer and it has unlicensed ZBrush for that person. So I'm going to try not to do that again. We're going to attempt to not have anyone's licenses be reset if I give you an answer. If you have additional questions related to ZBrush, you can go to our support page and you can fill out a ticket here. And this is pretty much the best way to get support information to us involving ZBrush issues and maybe potential bugs that you're running into. Now, oftentimes with ZBrushCore 8, since this is a new release, you may end up getting like an initial reply back that's basically asking you, how did you do the upgrade to ZBrushCore 8? Did you have any antivirus stuff running on your machine? Are you using any custom UIs? Because a lot of this stuff, when we do our internal testing, we usually use a vanilla version of ZBrush. So a lot of the stuff, we don't have custom UI loaded. We disable our antiviruses when we install. So those kind of things, like when they recommend, try reinstalling, a lot of the problems, even though it sounds trivial, do get resolved with just a new install of ZBrush. So oftentimes that's really the solution. And if it didn't work, like 80% of the time, it's kind of like the whole resetting your router thing. Like you call the people and they're like, yeah, my internet's down. It's like, did you reset the router? And you're like, really? This is your solution here? But then like 50 to 80% of the time when you reset that router, it just fixes itself. So the installing and uninstalling, I know it's a pain, but oftentimes if you've done an upgrade or things like that or have custom UI, a lot of the issues you may run into will potentially be because something that happened in there along that process. So That is why you get that, first reply out of it. But then other times, it may not be related to the install, and then it'll go deeper into support, and hopefully we can come through and answer those tickets for you. So we do a lot of support ticket answering. So a lot of different things on that. In addition to stuff that we have coming up soon, let's see if I can get the page here. Where are we at? So in less than a month, so we're getting to the end here, the ZBrush Summit will be happening, and this will be happening from October 5th to October 8th. So we're doing the ZBrush Live Sculpt Off on its own day, and this will be online only. So I will be hosting that with Jessica Drew, and we'll be doing a play-by-play on our Sculpt Off contestants. And the Sculpt Off will have these artists competing against each other, and they'll have only 3 hours to start from scratch and finish a piece. And that'll be happening on October 5th. And then we have our main summit, which starts on October 6th through 8th, and that is online and on-site. And if you're in the LA area and you can make it to the Noman campus, it is free. It's at a free event, so you can show up and just sit in the room there and watch the presenters use ZBrush with all the mysterious magical stuff that they do. And that's a free event there. And you can also register here, and this will just save you some time at the registration desk on site if you just do it through here. One more thing I want to hit on quick. So we are always looking for the people to do streaming on our Twitch channel. So if you go to ZBrushLive.com, and down here, there is a Creatives Apply here. And if you click this button, you'll get a form you can fill out, and you can come and stream on our Twitch channel. I said one final thing. We're going to hit one more thing, too. We've been doing these podcasts as well, and so there's a whole bunch of podcasts, and we have a lot more of these scheduled, so definitely check out these as well. A lot of good information talking casually to the artists and how they use ZBrush in various shapes and forms. So this is at ZBrushLive.com, and this will link to the Twitch channel here that you guys are on now. It also has the schedules. It has all the information on our Twitch, AskZBrush, all sorts of stuff. So this is your hub to kind of get that information. All right, so let's see what we got here. All right, so we're going to try to switch here and not show Chrome for the whole meeting. So we're going to switch to ZBrush here. And I want to hit on just one little trick here, and then we'll get to your questions as you guys are dialing them up here. So we had one question sent in asking about, I have a bunch of materials applied to my model. How can I find out what material is applied? So as an example of this, I'm just going to open up Lightbox here, and I'm just going to load in an earthquake file. And this is just a ZTL version of Earthquake, so he has a lot of the lighting information stripped out of his ZPR. So it's just a clean version of Earthquake here. And I'm first just going to isolate him. So I'm going to go to the subtool palette, and I'm just going to hold down Shift and click the eyeball icon. And the functionality of Shift for toggling everything on and off was added in ZBrush 4.8. So to do this now, you need to hold Shift and click, and that will toggle the visibility across all your subtools. And then with Earthquake here, I'm just going to select, say, the Skin Shade 4 material. I'm going to set M on, and I'm going to go to Color and just do a Fill Object. And that is taking this material, and it's now applying this material, or M channel, to the poly paint of Earthquake. So up here you have mRGB, RGB, and M. So RGB is just going to be your color information, red, green, and blue. And then the M channel is always going to be associated with this material. So inside of ZBrush, not only can you paint with RGB values on the poly paint, or the vertices of your model, you can also paint with materials. So I've just flooded Earthquake with Skin Shade 4. And now if I go to the material palette over here and I say grab this gold material, and I have Z-Add off with just the standard brush, just make sure I have M on. And now I come across and paint, and I'll be able to paint with this gold material on my model. So I can come through and start selecting different materials on Earthquake here. Just go through and just paint a whole bunch of stuff. Now normally you probably want to highlight different elements on Earthquake and not just make a mess of poly painting here. But you can see as I'm painting on the mesh, I'm painting with the material instead of RG and B. Now, you'll notice that when you paint materials inside of ZBrush, it's going to adhere to the polygons of the model. So if I turn on my polyframes here and zoom in, you'll see I'm going to get these stair-stepping effects around the areas where I'm painting with the materials. And this is because in the viewport, the materials are not going to blend. So it's kind of doing a similar process if you're used to using polygroups. So just think of materials as applying the same way as polygroups. So you need that face in there to assign the material to that area. So you're not going to get smooth transitions between those material borders. So to alleviate this, you can divide your mesh up. Or if you're using just rendering inside of ZBrush, there's an option where there's a slider you can turn on that's going to allow you to blend these materials at render time. And this slider is located in the Preferences tab up here, and in the Render tab up here. And if we go to the Render Properties, there's this material blend radius here. And if you set this, I'm going to set this to say 5. And now I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm just going to render with BPR. And when you render with this set, it's going to go through and look at those material breakups, and now it's going to blend between them. So you can see it's now giving this soft blend between those two materials. And you can set how much of this happens by just going to that Render tab and changing this blend radius. So if that was a little bit too smooth, you can undo that and then re-render again. And you can start playing with that slider there to get those materials to blend on your meshes. But that's only going to happen at render time. So the question I was getting to was, I have all these materials applied to my model, but now I don't know which one's what. So if I look at this one here, I'm like, it could be this one material, but I'm not really sure. It could be this material, I'm not really sure. So how can I find out what materials these are on my mesh? So to do this, the process is very, very simple. We just need to go over to our material palette here, and we're going to click and then drag. And as you drag, you're going to get this pick option. And you'll notice as I come across a material on my mesh there, the material is updating over there on the side. So as I'm dragging this out and going across these materials, you're seeing it switching over there. So if I come over here and land on the one here, it's going to tell me this is the gold material, and now I can come back in and just paint with gold. So the process again for that is just go to the material area, click and drag, and this is going to enable this pick option. And then you can hover over any of the materials on your model, and it's going to automatically pick that material, and then you come through and paint with it again. So that is how you can find out what materials you have applied to your mesh. So click on the material, drag, you're going to get this pick, and then you're going to be able to find that material on your mesh. So that's a good one, especially if you used a lot of material blending and stuff on your meshes, because oftentimes you're like, oh, what material was that? And that's a really handy one there for that. All right, so let's see what we got for questions here, because I've got a whole slew of stuff I can just go off on tangents with if needed. So one question here, is there a way to customize the clip curve brushes? So what kind of customizing are you looking to do? Because if you hold Control and Shift, you're going to get the select rectangle, and you come through here, and in here you have these clip brushes here. Now the customization you're going to be able to do with these is if you just select one here, so say select the clip curve. In here, with Control and Shift held, you can definitely change your stroke type. So you come in here and change these to different things. So if I want to use rectangle, circle, or lasso, I can change that. And this is still going to be the clip curve brush, but now it's just going to have a different stroke. And you can also, say, change other options too. So if I select the clip rectangle, it's going to give me that rectangle stroke. And in here with the rectangle stroke selected, you have the options for setting this to be square, to be centered. So you have different variables in there that you can change. That's pretty much it for a lot of the modifications you can do with the clip brushes. It's mostly the strokes. Are you looking for something different in that aspect of modifying the clip brushes? See if there's a response here. And I see Tomas is in here too, so he may be answering some of these as well. So, all right. Well, let me know on the customizing of the clip curve brushes, and we can go back to that. So I have one question here. Can you assign a custom curve? So the custom curves, you only have, so the clip curve question was asking about custom curves for the brush. So the only curves you're going to be able to assign are this one or the lasso. And this one, it's always going to give you the generation of this, which is the clip line. And if you drag this out, you can hold down spacebar to move this around. You can tap Alt while you drag this, and this will allow you to change the curve. But that's the most of the modification you're going to be able to do with the clip curve brush, with the curve stroke rather. And then the other option is if you use, say, the lasso stroke. So I've changed the clip circle to now a lasso, and I can now use this to establish my clip. But you're not going to be able to add custom clip strokes to it. So these are the only options you're going to get: rectangle, circle, curve, and lasso. So you can't have one that's always a particular shape and use that for the clip stroke. So no, so you cannot assign custom curves. You can make custom curves, but you can't assign them. And if you want to repeat the process, you can definitely grab this here. So if I do a clip stroke like this, you get something that's a little bit different. So I clip this out. You can definitely, in stroke here, if you need to repeat that stroke, you have an option that is replay last relative. And what you can do with this is you can do this stroke again. So if I come through and draw out a clip circle like this, which is giving me this effect, I can now come over to this side and hit Shift 1, and it's going to apply that same stroke again. So that's a little bit bad example. Let me get a circle stroke here. So, and we'll do it with slice so you guys can see this a little better. So here I have just a slice circle, and I just have a polysphere here. I'm just going to divide this up once, and then just delete lower on this. And so let's say I want to use this slice circle to generate a circle like this. And now I want to repeat that same circle over here. So to do this, we're going to use this replay last relative. And so we're going to do the stroke once, and then we're just going to hit Shift 1, and wherever we're hovering over when we hit Shift 1 is going to apply that same effect. So drag it out, make a little slice circle here. Now I'm going to hover over here and now press Shift 1, and that's going to repeat that slice circle. So you're going to be able to replay a stroke like that if you would like to do that. So that is one way if you need to make multiple strokes happen at the same area on your mesh. You can use that function, and it's going to just come through and replay that last stroke. Now once you rotate your canvas, it is going to change that because it won't be the last stroke you applied. So you want to make sure you have your mesh framed how you want it. Drag out your first, say, clip brush or slice brush or trim brush, and then Shift 1, and that'll repeat that effect. So you can come through and make polka dots pretty easy. So we have a question: how to regain local symmetry on a piece of armor on the arms or the legs. So local symmetry is always going to be based around the bounding box of the mesh. So that's always going to be how the local symmetry is. Are you referring to, say, posable symmetry? To enable local symmetry, so let's go and grab, say, the demo soldier here. We got these knee pads, and let's break one of these off. Modify topology. So say we have this knee pad here, and we want to sculpt on this side and on this side. So by default, if I just have the clay build-up brush and I sculpt on this side of the model, let's divide this up a little bit. You can see it's not affecting the other side. And if I even turn on symmetry, you can see it's using the world symmetry right now. So as I sculpt on this side, you can see the ghosting cursor on the other side over there, but it's not sculpting anything. So if you wanted to sculpt on this mesh, you can activate local symmetry, which is this here. This is just a button. And with local symmetry active, it's going to now look at the bounding box of this mesh, and it's going to find the center point of that. So if you'd like to see where this is, you can come up and just say activate the Gizmo 3D, and then press the go to unmask center. So this is the central line when using the local symmetry over here. So this is where it's using as the or the mirroring axis on that level. So if I draw here and there, it's going to come right across that central line there. Now, if you have something like this and you want to get it back to being symmetrical, you're going to probably have to do some rotation stuff here. So you can say rotate your mesh and try to find that axis point again, but it's still going to look at the local symmetry based on the bounding box of the mesh, and then it's still going to use the world coordinates to kind of determine where that is. So if you do a mirror and weld, that's going to give you a good estimate of where the local symmetry points is happening to. And so now I'm able to sculpt in that local axis on that model there. But if your mesh is off-centered or not symmetrical, you're not going to be able to get this function to work. But if it is symmetrical, you can just test it with that mirror and weld, and you just activate local symmetry over here. You should be able to use any of that local symmetry processes, and even if it's off-center on your model, so say I take it and move it. Let me get out of symmetry here. And I move it in space over here, maybe even back, so way off the world center. Since I still have local symmetry on and I sculpt on this, it's still going to respect this. On the mesh, even over there. So it's just looking at the bounding box of your model and using that for the local position. Now, if you want to use the world axis rather than the local axis, what you can also do is you can temporarily just move your part into the world space. And so to do this, you can go to the Transform tab, and in here we have a Set Pivot option. And what this will do, it's a very similar process to local symmetry, but this will actually take your model and put it in the center. So you can go to Tool or Transform and click S-Pivot, and you're going to see that the mesh looks like it's shifted. But if I activate Solo, you can see it's just taken the knee pad and it's just temporarily placed it into the middle of the geometry here. And now I come in and sculpt on this without local symmetry, and it's just going to use the world axis on that. And then after you're done with the sculpting, you go to Transform, you can hit Clear Pivot, and it's going to return it back to the location where it was. So that's the Transform, Set Pivot, and Clear Pivot option. And then the other process was using local symmetry. Now, another thing that's kind of fun is you can also use array mesh to kind of reposition things. So say you have something you want to model here, but then you want to model it somewhere else. So you may want to shift stuff around. So you can come with my knee pad here, and I'm just going to activate array mesh. So go in here, just toggle this on. I'm going to turn on transpose and switch to the transpose line here. And I'm just going to take this and now move it, and then just position my pivot here somewhere else. So I can position it, say, all the way down here. And what I've done is I've just created a array mesh of this. So actually, let me do a better example here. Let's take this one and move him to the center of the world. So we'll just take our elbow pad here. So let's say we bring in our model and we put the arm pad at the base of his feet, but now we want to position it on our character, but we still want to be able to sculpt in this position right here. So we're going to activate array mesh, make sure transpose is on, go to my transpose line here. I'm going to grab the inner circle here on the middle, which should give me a move. I'm in the right axis here. Come on now. And now I can move this and reposition this on my character model. So now it is positioned here, and this is just an array or a copy of my original one. So now, since the array mesh is a instance process, I can now affect my mesh here, and you're going to see it's going to update on the one up there. So this is another handy little tool you can use. Say if you want to bring in like all your parts of your armor and have them lined up symmetrically, so you can add stuff to them and modify them and change them, but have it affect the other one that's on your model, so you can kind of see it visually. And this will work with anything too, so as long as I don't have subdivisions on this, I can even come in and say add, say, some insert mesh parts on this, and add this here, and you can see it's still going to update on that mesh there. So if I want to add maybe some bolts to the side of that, move these around a little bit with my gizmo here, and you'll see it's going to update on that other mesh there. So a little handy little process there, if I don't replace everything. And that's just using the array mesh functionality. So just bring your model in and then arraying it to the position of your model and then allowing you to sculpt in two things. And then when you're happy with this and you want to convert this other one now to geometry, you can use the Make Mesh button here in Array Mesh, or you could also go to the Geometry tab and use Convert BPR to Geo, and this will now take those and it's going to bake the array mesh into real geometry. And so now you can see I have two versions of that knee pad, so the one that's posed on my model and the one that's floating off in space now. So that is another workflow you can do to kind of reposition things or move them around and have them sculpt in symmetrical formats using local symmetry, using the world symmetry, and then also having them positioning or be visible on your model. Nanomesh is another functionality you can do too, which is pretty handy. You can create a nanomesh plane and then take your object, and then when you move it around, they're all going to update. It's another fun one to do. If you want me to show you the nanomesh one, I can do that quick too. All right, let's see what other questions we got here. One question, is there a way to save polypaint for ZRemesher? So ZRemesher, the process for that, it's retopologizing your mesh. So that means it's totally changing the structure of your model. So there's not going to be any way to retain the polypaint that you may have had a model after you ZRemesh it. Now what you can do is, let's take an example here, see what I got. Let's do this one. What you can do is you can do a projection. So let's say we're going to make something beautiful. We're always making something beautiful. There we go. Let's fill this with red paint. And then we'll come in and we're going to get some yellow. I'm just going to turn off Z-Add. Get back to my standard brush here. RGB and yellow. And we're just going to paint some stuff here. And we'll maybe do something like this. I'm going to run out of room. So there we go. So we got an AskZBrush head. So when you use ZRemesher, it's going to generate new topology for your mesh. So if I come over to the Geometry tab and I go to ZRemesher and I click ZRemesh on this mesh here, you can see it's going to ZRemesh this model. Probably should have used a little bit lower settings here, so it's a little bit faster. And you'll see the poly painting's gone. And this is because your topology has totally changed. So this is the new topology after ZRemeshing, and this is your old topology, which was that Dynamesh topology. So if I want to create new topology for this, but I still want to retain this poly painting, what you can do is a projection. And so to do this, I go to the subtool palette here, and I just want to first make a duplicate copy of my mesh. So I have my Dynameshed version that has the topology that I don't really want, but it has the poly painting I want. And I'm just going to take that, and I'm just going to duplicate it. So now I have two of these. Now I'm going to hold Shift and click the eyeball icon on the second one here, so it's the only one visible. And now I'm going to run that ZRemesher process again. So I'm going to come down here and just click ZRemesher. And it's going to go through and process this model and give me that new topology. So this should be similar to the topology that I just generated a second ago. And now I have this. So here I have, say, my new topology. We'll do this a little bit lower. We'll go to half. Just get this down a little bit. One nice thing about ZRemesher is you can use it multiple times. So if you get a topology count that you are happy with the results of where it's kept the details, but it's a little bit too high, you can come over here and enable half and then just keep clicking ZRemesher, and it's just going to keep giving you a lower and lower version of that. So that's really handy for generating more simplistic shapes out of your meshes. And now with this, what I want to do is I want to get the poly painting back that I had from the original model. So with this mesh here, the first thing I want to do is just divide it up, and I want to divide it up to something around the same polygon count that I had on my original mesh. So if I go to the head here, you can see this is 106,000 points here, and my head here is 2,000. So I'm just going to divide this up. So I'm going to go to the Geometry tab and click on Divide a few times, and I'm just going to divide this up till it's roughly around the same thing. So we'll do 500,000 just for good measure here. And now with this one selected, I want to make sure I turn the eyeball icon on for the one that contained that poly paint information. I also want to turn on my paintbrush icon here. So when the paintbrush icon is active on your subtool, this is just turning on the poly paint or any stored vertex painting or vertex color that's on your mesh. So by just enabling this, I've now just turned on the poly painting for the ZRemeshed head, and I've turned on the poly painting for the original head. Now with the ZRemeshed head selected and the other head with the eyeball icon active, I'm going to go to the Project tab here, and in here there's a Project All button. And before I click this, I want to change this distance amount here. So the distance amount that I normally use for pretty much everything is 0.1. And this just usually gives me a happy result for all my processes. And now after I have that set, I now just need to click Project All. And when you click Project All, it's going to take the model you have selected, and any subtool that has this eyeball icon on, it's going to project the details from those meshes. And I can pretty much, in ZBrush, project any detail back. So if you sculpted another model and then maybe you only sculpted part of it, maybe you had the head and the neck separated and you sculpted a growth on the arm or something, you want to project it back to the body, you can pretty much project everything using this process in ZBrush. So even if you have bits and pieces of sculpture, you can always project them back to another mesh. So I use it oftentimes as a backup solution as well. So I'll duplicate a subtool if I have some sculptural details that I like and then I want to explore something else. I'll do the project option to bring that back if needed. So now I'm going to click Project All, and this is just going to run through this process here. I probably should have clicked this while I was talking. And after this is done, so that was actually pretty quick. Now if I have just the ZRemeshed version selected and I just go to Solo here, you can see it should be pretty much identical to the original one. So as I'm switching through these subtools here, the one with Solo active, you can see I'm not getting any change. And if I turn on my polyframes, you can see this is the version with the ZRemeshed topology, and this is the version with the Dynamesh topology. So basically what I've done is I've retopologized the model, and I've now projected the details back from the high resolution version. And this workflow is, pretty much the majority of the one that a lot of people do. It's the same thing. So they use the remesher to get that low res mesh, and then they project the details back from the high one. And now that this is done, you can hit Shift D, and you see I still have subdivisions on this too. So I can go back down to that real low resolution cage if I needed. So say I want to make UVs on this mesh, I can go back to that. But that's the main process for keeping polypaint or putting polypaint back on a model after you've processed it with ZBrusher. So let me know if that helps. So let's see what other questions we got here. Reading these quick. Let's see. It's flooded. It's flooded in here. I see Shane Olson has joined us. Hello, Shane. I was giving a shout out to people to come watch your channel tonight. Go watch Shane. All right, so a question about creating a brush that will keep the same size through the stroke without disabling the tablet pressure, but maintains a constant Z intensity. So in your stroke options up here, I think this is where it is. Let me find these. It's either that or draw. Let's see. This one I may have to get back to. I can do it, but I can't remember where. That's the problem. Let's use my great example head here. And so let's say I have the standard brush, and I want the Z intensity to be constant. So if I come through and sculpt on this, let's get on my mesh here. Let's turn off this crazy coloring. There we go. So with tablet pressure on, if you press and hold, you're going to see it's going to change the size and the intensity of your sculpt as you're drawing it out. And this is controlled in the brush palette. Now, watch this not work. And in here you have a size and intensity slider. So if you want the size to stay constant, you can just change this graph. And now the size should always stay the same, and the intensity should be the only thing that's changing. But maybe not. Tomas may yell at me here in a second. Oh, well, the intensity was staying the same. Size was changing. So that's that way. And so basically, come through here and play with these sliders over here. And this should allow you to, yeah, okay. So this one's keeping the same intensity, and it's changing the size now of your stroke there. So it should be always the same intensity, and the stroke is changing. And then for the size, this should now keep it constant all the way through. So no matter how much you press, it's going to do nothing. So these are in the brush palette here, and this will be set, should be set per brush. Let me double check that for you. Yep. And so in here per brush, you just need to go to the tablet pressure area, and you have a size and an intensity area. And in here you can just change the graph, and if it's up maxed out to the top here, this is going to be 100%, and then down at the bottom is 0%. So that is what this graph here is changing. And the same with the Z intensity well, and you can also change the RGB intensity. So for any brush where you may want to just keep the Z intensity constant, you can just set that to there, and now when you draw this out, that intensity should be the same, but now your size will be different. So as low brush pressure, small size, large brush pressure, large size, and you should be able to change that in here as well. And then if you use these global settings one, it's going to use the options that I believe are inside the preferences tab here. So let me know if that helps on that issue for the brush strokes there. So back to the S-pivot stuff. If the knee was at an angle, it's going to look at using the local symmetry again and the S-pivot. If it's at an angle, it's still going to look at the world axis for that. So if you're shifted off, if it's shifted like front and back, you're going to be fine if you're using like X symmetry. You just may have to play with your symmetry to make sure it's on the right angle from when you're sculpting on it. But if you do rotate it and then do that clear pivot again, it's definitely going to update on your other mesh. I'm reading these questions here. So, a question about key shot. You have my model completely separated into subtools. To assign materials in key shot, can I have merged subtools but still be able to assign mats to the different polygroups? So so for the renderer here for key shot, you have the option to group by material, and you can also have your model split up as subtools. So it will send over as subtools, or it will send over as materials. So you could technically, if you had these polygroups set up, what you can do, if you're just doing this for a rendering purpose, let's get this one here. You can come through and say you have this here, and you want to keep them like as subtools. So let's say I have this, and I want to send this over, but I don't want to break it up because I have a bunch of subtools, but I want to have, say, like this edge here as a different material than the back one here. And so I want to send it to KeyShot as, I want to keep it in ZBrush as one subtool, but I want to send it to KeyShot as two separate parts. So then I can easily apply stuff to them. So what you can do is you can apply a material, different material, instead of the polygrouping will not transfer over. You can do something like this, which will give me the same effect, but it will end up, let's get this flat island here. So I'm going to give this a new polygroup. So let's say I want this to go and this to go. So you have two options. Option one, if you don't mind it being separate subtools, basically I'll just do this really quick. You can just come through and now just do a split on this. So you go split, group split. It's going to take those two, and now you're going to have both those parts as separate subtools. But if you want to keep them as the same subtool and send it over and then have it go into the KeyShot as two parts, what you need to do is, we have these polygroups here, is we first need to split our model based on the polygroups. Because if we come through and say apply a material, so we come through and do this shiny one here, and I turn M on and do color fill object, it's going to fill the entire thing with it. But then let's say I come through and I insert an edge loop here and get this, and now put this with gray. And I'm getting there we go. So I filled this with gray, just this polygroup here, but you can see it's also applied it here. So there is always blending that will sometimes happen even with the materials. So as you applied a material here, it affected this other part. So if you want to make sure that it doesn't affect other parts, especially if you have low resolution models, what you need to do is perform a split of the groups on the subtool, and then that will allow you to unweld those borders basically, and then you can apply different materials to both of them. So if you come down to the geometry tab here, I think it's here somewhere, and there is a unweld groups border button. So this is in the tool palette, geometry, modify topology, unweld groups border. And that's going to look at your polygrouping that you have on the mesh here, and it's just going to unweld the borders of your polygroups. And when you do this, and now let's say I fill model with all gray, and then I select this part and now fill it with that shiny material. You can now see now I have those materials separate. This one's actually hard to see. Let's do this. Let's do a red. Now I have that clean division between those polygroups. So I've taken those polygroups and now I've just used this unweld groups border, which is now unwelded the groups between those polygroup splits. And then on each of those polygroups, I can apply a new material. Now once you have these materials applied, then you can come up to the render tab up here, and in here you can use this groups by material button. And then when you send that to Keyshot, anywhere where this material is, even if it's on a separate subtool, it's going to be linked. And then any material that's this color that's on a separate subtool is going to be linked as well. So you can use that process to send them things to Keyshot and have a little less managing you have to do inside of Keyshot to apply materials to different areas. And then this will also allow you to keep your subtool list where it is already. Now the welding stuff usually won't cause anything, especially if you're rendering. If you're 3D printing, it's going to cause a whole bunch of mess. But if you're just rendering things, this process shouldn't be harming anything else. So that may work for you. I'd say give that a try and see if that gets what you want out of it. Yeah, and it appears that Shane has also mentioned the unlink material button. You can definitely do that too, which will unlink and then give you the options of having those parts separate inside of Keyshot. So, question about a CNC plugin that I made. Does it scale in millimeters? You can scale it for whatever you want it to be. You can also just use the Scale Master plugin, which is now inside of 4.8. So you can load these CNC plugin and then process that. It's going to be defaulted to inches, but it does have millimeter input in that. And then after you're happy with that, if you need to change the scale of it, you can just come through and use this plugin. And this will set the scale to pretty much whatever you want. So it's up to you on what scale you want. The scale inside of ZBrush is determined by the XYZ size of the subtool. So if you have this subtool here, this pipe, and you come down to geometry and go to size, you can see there's this XYZ size value here. And then way down at the bottom, there's an export scale. So your size inside of ZBrush is the XYZ size multiplied by the scale. And this is generic units that resemble millimeters already, but they are generic units. So if you export this model out, it's going to come out at the size of 2. So it's going to be 2 this way in the largest direction. So if I export that out into an inches environment, this is going to come into the inches environment as 2 inches. If I export this out and import it into a millimeters environment, it's going to come into that environment as 2 millimeters. So it's just generic units. So just keep that in mind, especially when you're messing with any sort of scale stuff inside of ZBrush. And also in relation to scale, the XYZ size at 2 is where ZBrush's happy place is going to be. If your subtool is at 2, your Dynamesh is going to work the best. ZModeler is going to work the best. Pretty much everything works the best with a mesh that is no larger than 2. Now, when you import a mesh in from somewhere else, so say you have a model that is 20 centimeters inside of Maya, right? When you import it in, what ZBrush is going to do, it's going to take that 20, it's going to first divide it by 2, and then it's going to take the remainder and put it in the scale value. So if I brought a mesh in that was 20 centimeters inside of Maya and I import it as an OBJ, OBJ doesn't contain any unit information, so that's just coming in as a generic 20. So it's taking that 20, it's going to put 2 here, and then it's going to put 10 in the scale. So that way, that mesh, when you bring it in as an OBJ, it's going to be set up for the precise XYZ size of 2, which ZBrush likes, but then it's going to hold the scale through the export slider here. And so then when you export that OBJ back out, it should line up back inside of Maya. So more confusing stuff for you guys this morning on AskZBrush. Buffering. Let's see what else we got here. I think I agreed with most of your madness, Shane. So for Darkgrim, the plugins now are all on the Pixologic website. Pixologic. Pull this up quick. You don't see anything yet. I'm going to switch this correct this time. It's going to be amazing. Let's see if I can find this here first. Back to Chrome. All right, so you guys should now see my screen here. I'm doing it right today. All right, so if you go to Pixologic.com and you go to ZBrush, Download Center plugins. You can also get this from the main page or just Google search Download Center ZBrush. And in the ZBrush plugins tab, in here you have a whole bunch of plugins. So a lot of these are the standard ones at the top here that are shipped with 4.8. However, if there is any updates to these plugins, like the blend shape one here, a download link will appear on these. So there was a update for the blend shapes for 4.8 for Windows. So if you're using Maya blend shapes, there is a new download version for that. So if you've been having issues with the blend shapes or having it not load at all inside of ZBrush 4.8, there is an update for that. And if any of these get updated over time, this will also appear with a download link as well. And if you scroll down to the bottom of this page here you have all my fun little employee created plugins. And these are all working with 4R8. So a lot of the ones, if you guys are used to them, they're all here now. So you can download these. And these will be updated as well as I get reports back for bugs or various issues. So you can come through and grab these. I still have a few more that I'm currently still working on upgrading, so those will end up appearing here as well. But if you're used to having them inside of 4R7, they're going to be located here. And that's just at Pixologic.com, ZBrush, Download Center. And then after you get to the Download Center, it should take you to this page here. Just go up to the top here, click the ZBrush Plugins tab, and then all the information will be here. Now, for any of the plugins on this page, if you run into any issues, I highly recommend going through support and submitting tickets on that. So that's the easiest way to get anything addressed, resolving related to any of these plugins. So just use support for that. All right, so let's go back to questions here. So can you export, we have one question here about exporting a cavity map when the sculpting is HD but not full quality. So the only way you're going to be able to get that cavity map out is if you say create a, use the poly paint for your mesh and paint the cavity, or take the mask for that cavity and then bake it into the poly paint, and then you can export that out as a map. Currently the masking will not retain, because you have to be out of HD mode to generate the map. So that one will not work unless you bake it into the geometry of the mesh through poly painting, and then you can get it out. Is there a way to combine two separate UVs when merging two separate meshes? So yes. So if we go to ZBrush here, and you just have, say, more than one subtool here, in the merge area here, turn on my visibility. Let's go back to ZBrush. There we go. So the question is asking, is there a way to basically retain UVs across two subtools when merging them together? And so to do this, you just need to make sure you have your two subtools. So as an example here, cylinder pipe and cylinder pipe 2. Neither of these have UVs, but we're going to go for it. And after you have these together and you're ready to do your merge, down in the merge area, so this is subtool and then merge, you have a merge visible or a merge down. And next to these, you have a weld and a UV. So if you would like to keep the UVs of subtool 1 and the UVs of subtool 2, just turn this on, and then when you perform that merge, it's going to retain those UVs. So it's going to hold those. And then you're going to get one subtool with those UVs together. Now, if they're stacked on top of each other, they're still going to be stacked on top of each other because we're only using one UV space. But you can merge subtools with UVs and retain the UVs for both those subtools by just activating that UV option there. Yeah, the Dynamesh Master plugin I'm still messing with. That was my last one I'm working on. 4R7 may be working. I've heard reports that it does work, but I don't know if I trust it. A new one will be out soon. Questions. Question asking about the Z Startup Masker changing your Z intensity to 100. Shouldn't be doing that. The aspect for that, if it is a brush, it will have to be stored with the brush. So that's the only process there. Everything else pretty much with that is going to get stored in a ZBrush project file. So a lot of the data that's stored is generated through that. There is a few updates for Z Startup Master. I don't know when you downloaded the version you have, but I recommend just going on there and grabbing that. And also don't use a version that is supposed to work with 4R7. So pretty much any plugins that were made for 4R7 entirely broke for 4R8 because of some of the changes with the subtool functionality and the live booleans. So if you're using a 4R7 version, that could also definitely be causing issues there. So question about generating normals and AO to use ZBrush or other software. So me in general, so for straps and items like that, I'll tend to use ZBrush, especially for different things on characters. So I don't really have any examples to show you here, but I will use the normal map generation for straps and things like that. For other baking of stuff, I tend to go to, say, XNormal or even using Handplane Baker, and those are the two that I'll go to. And primarily the reason I do straps, but I don't do full characters inside of ZBrush, is because oftentimes my low-res cage and the high-resolution model are different meshes, so they're not the same. Now, if I do have a subtool that has subdivision levels and I'm able to generate the maps from a low subdivision to a high subdivision, then I'll just use ZBrush for that process. But if the tool consists of, if I have a low res version that's the cage kind of matches the topology of the mesh, but I don't want to do a projection or anything like that with the model, I'll use an external application. So I'll export the low and export the high. But most of the times when I do that, the low resolution version and the game version is a separate subtool from the high poly model. And so the high poly model at that point probably has no lower subdivisions, and it's probably like 20 million polygons, and I don't want to go back in and generate subdivisions on that. So I just make another subtool, build around it, and then export both those out and do the projections. So that's usually what I do with those. But for straps, generally I'll generate a strap, play with an IMM brush, UV that, and then divide it up, sculpt my details on it, and then at that stage I have a high res and a low res subdivision for that mesh, so I just bake the normals right out of there. Oh man, so many UV questions. It's bringing back nightmares. UVs, maps, topology. So a question about UVs again. Can you move the UVs in flatten mode? Why, yes, you can. So let's see here. Let's go. I've got an example file for UVs. Let me first reset all these brushes here since I went a little bit crazy. We're going to load a new project here. clean out some of this mess I've been making. And now let's grab a new file here that has UVs. So here we have a cylinder UV map. And the question is asking about moving the UVs after they've been generated using Flatten. So the correct way to do this is you need to use the UV Master plugin, which is in the Z plugin tab. And so you have your model here. This one already has, say, UVs applied. I'm going to click this Work on Clone, which is going to take this model and generate a new version for it. And this is just going to allow me to modify the UVs, and then copy them and then paste them back to my original model. Now after I click Work on Clone, I can now click Flatten, and this will now display the UVs in a flattened form. If you have a map loaded on your model, it's going to transfer this over. So we're going to texture map and just turn that off. And where's my other cylinder there? I should have a few of these guys here. Where did you go? I swear this works. Let's try this again. Let's try this again. Maybe I stacked these. I might have them stacked. All right, here. We're just going to do this. Back to my cylinder here. All right, so we're just going to unwrap with the existing polygroups. Just unwrap that sucker. Now we're going to work on clone, flatten, and now I got this, which didn't do exactly what I wanted to do. But once you're in the flatten functionality on that clone object, you can now move these around. So you can take these and rescale your UVs. Reposition them, move them wherever you want, and this is going to just allow you to change these. You can smooth them out. This is a horrible example I'm giving you guys right now, but you can come through and modify your UVs like this. Now when you return back from the flatten, ZBrush is going to take this and it is going to rescale it to the extent of the border. So if you come through here and say have my map like this, and I go to say unflatten, and now you do texture map, create new from UV map, you're going to see that's going to be pushed to the border. So that's only one thing you have to look out if you start modifying with your UVs, because if you modify a piece and it's not fully extended to that grid border, it's going to take those UVs and extend it out. So oftentimes this isn't going to be an issue, especially if you have a model that's kind of already flushed out to the extents of the border. But if you come through and start modifying UVs, it will end up doing that process. So just one little thing there. So you can see now my map is like this, but say I want it smaller. So I come in and do this. And I'm like, okay, I want my map right there. But now if you get out of that unflatten and now do new from UV map, you're going to see it's still filling to the extents. So one thing there with that and using the flatten functionality. But after you have it flattened, you can just copy these UVs. After you have them laid out, you can modify them and then go back to your original mesh and then just paste UVs on that, and it's going to update your model for it. So that's the basic functionality for flattening. Now if you use the morph option down here, where's that at? UV map, morph UV. This is not going to allow you to change your UVs. It's just giving you a preview of your UVs on your mesh. And then just turning this on and off is just going to morph. But that's not going to allow you to modify your UVs. So little thing there as well. Okay, what time is it? So we got time for maybe 2 more questions. Let's see what else we got here. Yes, you can rotate the stuff. You can rotate, you can move it, you can smooth it, you can use any of the brushes while you're in that flatten mode to move stuff around. Yes, and Mostro is telling you also as well that if you go to the brush palette and you are in that mode, you can use the auto masking functionality of mask by polygroups as well, and that'll allow you to just move the geometry islands around. So that's a very handy feature. And the mask by polygroups does work with transpose lines, so you can definitely use that and move things around. You can mask things out, manipulate them. You can use the polish stuff, so you can definitely manipulate your UVs in that flatten mode. No, Tomos, I won't sculpt a heart for you. Sorry. So the the vertex groups you're seeing are probably related to the polygrouping. And so when you set up polygrouping inside of ZBrush, it's going to give you another group. So if you say have our cylinder here, back to the cylinder, I'm going to get the ZModeler brush and just fill this with a polygroup here. So if you exported this out, this is going to give you 3 of those groupings. So it's going to give you this one, it's going to give you the center and part here, and then this part. So that is what the grouping is probably, I'll sculpt you a heart later, Thomas. It's probably relating to for your question there. And importing these in, it should, if you import that OBJ back in, it should remember the polygroups. Like, don't bet your life on that answer, but it should be importing those back in. So you can try importing back in. I think the FBX will import and export those as well. So if you have polygrouping and export those out, it should retain as those groups. And then if you keep those groups and then import it back into ZBrush, it should hold those. So let's see what else I got here. All right, so I'm going to show you guys one more thing quick. So we had a question sent in, and I'm going to do a video on this one too, but this is a little fun thing since we're talking about exporting stuff out and things like that. So let's say I have a VDM brush. So let's create one quick. So if you guys have not watched some of the latest AskZBrush stuff, I'll show you guys how to create a VDM brush quick. So let's just create one quick. So I'm going to grab the template 512 and load this in. And now the VDM stuff, for the vector displacement mesh, is going to allow you to generate basically a 3D alpha that's going to allow for undercutting. So I'm going to take this and just pull some vertices out with the move brush here. I'm just going to make a very simple, it's a little bit too big, simple shape. The random spike or fur is big. It's a big thing. Everybody's doing it. So we're going to take this and just sculpt on this a little bit. And so let's say we made this wonderful shape. There we go, perfect. Now to turn this into a brush, so I can use it for sculpting and have this overhang or this undercut retain, I just need to have it like so. And I need to go to the brush palette here, and I'm just going to select a chisel brush. So any of these chisel brushes through here are going to accept 3D geometry. And if you hover over these, you'll see their base type is a single layer brush. So you want to make sure you have one of these selected as a single layer brush. So I'm going to select the Chisel 3D, just select that. And now I have my shape, it's ready to go. I'm ready to turn this into a part for a brush. So I'm going to make a new brush. So I'm going to go to the brush palette up here, go to the create menu, and I'm going to click create multi-alpha brush. Now even though it says multi-alpha and I only have one, it's still going to create me a brush. So I'm going to click this, and now it's going to make a new brush at the top here. And now with my VDM brush created, I can say get a sphere 3D, divide this up, and now I can start sculpting, and you're seeing I'm going to get this great shape with this awesome underhang. Perfect. This is exactly what I want. Now I can make awesomeness. All right, so now let's say I have this, all right, and it's working incredible inside of ZBrush, and now I want to get it out. I want to take it somewhere else, maybe use it in another application somewhere. So how can you go by doing this? So first, we just need to have our brush selected, and then we're going to the brush palette up here. And with our brush selected and our 3D alpha selected, we're just going to brush to mesh. And this is now going to give us a very similar looking result to the same thing we created. So if you can create a new grid plane and do this process as well, but let's say you grabbed a brush from somewhere else, or you want to get a part out from an existing chisel brush that's already in here, you just select it, select the part, go to brush, and do to mesh, and it's going to give you a new grid plane with that sculpting applied to it. Now, after you have this grid plane applied, let's say we want to export this out to an EXR map for another, use the vector displacement map in another application. So if we go to the texture tab up here, we can now do a from mesh. And this will now take this piece of geometry here that's set up as a grid plane, and it's going to give me a new map out of it. Now, if you look at the map, you may end up seeing some colors on these, and this is highly related to how ZBrush is changing the 3D alpha to a mesh. And so when you generate these things, if you import this back into ZBrush, it's going to work fine. But if you import it into external applications, it may not give you the same result you're looking for. So if you see red or any blue on your mesh, you need to now modify this a little bit and then do this from mesh again. So with the map here, or the mesh selected, and if you have red showing up on your texture, you need to go to the tool palette, go down to the deformation palette here, turn on X and then click mirror, and then now go to the texture tab and do from mesh again, and this is now going to give you a VDM mesh without that red. And this VDM map here will be able to export it into anything and will work correctly. So if you see any red when you do the from mesh, you want to make sure you mirror it and then do it again. And another example here of just this process, because this is probably pretty confusing, is let's just say I have a VDM map from another application. So I want to bring that in first, and I want to make that into a brush, but then I want to export it back out. So the process for this, I'm going to go to the texture, I'm just going to do import, and I'm just going to select a VDM map. So here we have one that's been brought in. Now after this is brought in, I need to now convert it to a mesh and then create what I have from the mesh into a brush. So I'm going to import the map in. Here we have it. Now I'm going to do to mesh. This is going to give me this result. So I'm getting what that VDM should look like as it was sculpted on a grid plane. So here you have this little design here. Now I want to turn this back into a brush so I can apply it to other models. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to make sure I have a chisel brush selected. So this time I'm going to grab the chisel creature brush here. Go to the brush palette, go to the create menu, and do create multi-alpha brush. It's going to take this mesh and now convert it to a 3D alpha. And you'll see now I have a new brush created here. Now I can go to my sphere with those wonderful spikes there, and now I can start dragging out these guys too. And if I divide my mesh up here, you can see I can start doing all sorts of crazy, awesome details with this. So there we go. So now let's say I brought that VDM in, I've made my brush, but now I want to export it back out. So I'm going to go and just have my brush selected, and go to the brush palette up here. I'm going to do to mesh again, which is going to take that map and generate that plane like so. Now at this point, you can modify this as ever you want. So if I want these spikes here to say be inflated some, you can come in and just, do whatever you want on this grid plane. It's going to retain that. And now I want to get this back out as an EXR map. So I'm going to go to the texture tab here. I'm going to do from mesh again. And you're going to notice this one did not give me any of the crazy colorings, so it's good to go. Now I can just export this out, and now I have exported a new VDM map out with those changes I modified. Now just want to show one more thing here with the chisel stuff. Let me just reset all these brushes. And let me show you the other coloring option. So let's say I choose this mouth one here, and this is giving me this kind of crazy effect. So it's giving me this. Let's say I want to get that out as a VDM EXR map. So I'm going to make sure I have it selected, go to the brush palette again. I'm going to do the to mesh, which is going to give me now the version of it in its grid plane format. And now if I go to the texture map tab and do from mesh again, you're going to see that this time I got rainbow colors. So I got red and blue. So when you get red, what do? You get red, you need to go to the tool palette, go to mirror, make sure X is on, mirror it. And now when you go texture from mesh, you can see the red's gone, but now I still got the blue. So if you still got the blue, you need to go to mirror, click Y, turn off X, and now do from mesh. Let's make sure I mirrored that. And now do from mesh. And now I should have no red, no blue, and now I have the map ready to go. And then with this map ready to go, you can now go to export, and now I can export that out as a VDM vector displacement map for use anywhere. So that's the little process there. Now another thing of note is that if you're exporting out VDM maps to use in other applications, some applications have a restriction, or rather a requirement, where you need to have the map named _VDM in order for it to work. So if you're exporting maps out of ZBrush to use in other applications, and you load them in and nothing's happening and they're not looking correct, that application may have a restriction where you need to have the name of the VDM map labeled somewhere in the name. So I could have Bob _VDM. So that's another thing to look out for, especially if doing a lot of VDM map stuff and use for other applications. If it's not working, check to see if the application has a naming requirement. So you wouldn't think that this would be a thing that would happen, but yeah. So that could be the main issues that if you're trying to export maps out of ZBrush that are not looking correct. And that could be anything. So even if you're just using vector displacement maps on your meshes, the application may have a restriction that you need to have that name correct. So if it's not working, try that. All right, so let's see if we got any time for one last one, because I'm already going over here. Yes, my head does hurt quite a bit. Oh, Thomas isn't bringing the chocolate. That's not good. Let's see. I don't know what Bob VDM would look like. It probably looks a lot like Earthquake. All right, so last one here. This is gonna be a quick one, just for thing here. So we're talking about chainmail here. There's a question about chainmail. What's the best way to turn a high poly chainmail armor to a low poly chainmail armor? So the basic principle on that is projection related to stuff. So let's see. I'm running over here, but I want to do this one because it's easy. Okay. So let's first talk about how to make some chainmail quick. So I'm going to get out of this brush. And this is the last one. Then I got to go. I'm already over time. So I got a Ring 3D object. I'm going to go down here to the initialize menu here. Any primitive that has a 3D appended afterwards on the name is going to have this handy dandy little initialize menu. And in here you can change settings. So I'm going to change my subdivision count here to say, we'll do 6. And then my other divide to say 12. It's too many and 6. Let's do 4. That looks pretty good. We'll go with this. So 16 and 8. There we go. There's the happy number I'm looking for. So I've just taken that ring primitive and I've just reduced it down. So the process I'm going to do to generate some quick chainmail is I'm going to use this and I'm just going to make a little patch or piece of geometry, and then I'm going to use nanomesh to apply it to a surface. So with this set like that, I'm going to go back to the top here. I'm going to click Make Polymesh 3D. So now I have this. And now I just need to manipulate this a little bit here to get a little pattern established. So I just have one here, and then I'm going to take this. I have no subdivisions on this mesh. So if I have the Gizmo 3D selected and I hold down the Control key and then click on the Move option, I'll be able to duplicate that piece internally in that subtool. So you can see I have 2 rings. I'm going to take this and just rotate it back a little bit. Now I'm going to reset my Gizmo 3D. So I'm going to click the unlike icon. I'm going to click this to reset my orientation and then lock it back. Now I just have the Gizmo 3D back to the world origin. I'm going to hold Control and drag down and just make another one of those. And then I make a third copy of this. So Control and drag up. And then this one I'm going to reposition to here. Try to get it in the middle of these 2 guys here. This isn't going to be perfect. Sometimes it's perfect, sometimes it's not. And I'm going to reposition this. So I just get this chain link looking like thing. We'll have to modify that one on the bottom there. So now I have this, and I want one more of these. So I'm going to unlock, reset my orientation, and now click and drag this sucker again. And I want like 2, 2, and 2, 2. There we go. So now I've got this. I just made this little section of chain. These ones are interpenetrating and it's driving me a little nuts. So I'm going to go down to the polygroups tab here, do an auto groups. I'm going to select this one and select this one, then hold Control and invert my visibility. I'm just going to mask those quick. I could have done this other ways, but we're doing it this way. And now I'm just going to reposition these guys up so it's not looking too crazy. And there we have my chainmail patch. Now at this stage I can divide this up if I want this to look a little smoother, but I'm going to leave it just like this, and I'm going to give it all one polygroup. So I'm going to hit Control W. That's going to assign it all a single polygroup there. Now with this I just need to create a new nanomesh brush for this. So make sure I'm in Draw. And I'm going to go to the brush palette up here. I'm going to first create an insert mesh. So have a mesh. That's just a subtool, right? Single subtool. Brush, create insert mesh. I'm going to create a new one of these. After this is created, I'm going to go back to the brush palette. And now I'm going to create a nano mesh brush. So in order to create a nano mesh brush, you have to have an insert mesh brush. And any insert mesh brush can convert it to a nano mesh brush. So now after I have this as an insert mesh brush, I'm going to create a nano mesh brush. And now I have a new Z-modeler brush with a nano mesh of this part built in. So now I'm going to go to this handy dandy polysphere, and I'm going to attempt not to load in a project and erase my chainmail here. And I'm going to reduce my subdivisions, and we're going to reconstruct to get a little bit lower. And now I'm going to, with this brush that has this nano mesh part, I'm going to hover over a poly on my sphere here and click and drag, and this is going to assign this nanomesh instance here to that poly. Now if I hold down shift while I'm dragging this out, it's going to look at the existing poly group and it's going to use it. And so since this entire sphere has the same poly group, I'm now getting crazy chainmail. And so there I've taken that part and now generated a chainmail sphere. So now with this generated, I can now go to the nanomesh tab here, and you can turn off the placement if you want to see it without the inner sphere, and you see a chainmail ball of craziness. You can change your scale here and manipulate your nanomesh now, so it's kind of liking the way that was looking. I don't know if I'm going to modify it too much. You can also use fit and fill, which will come through, and if you use any of these, if you set them to 1 and then offset your rotation here, you'll be able to get these to stretch too, and then you can link them together. So you can play with the nanomesh design. I'm going to go back to my original one, this one here. And then after you have this done, I can go to, say, the Edit Mesh option, and in here I can modify this chainmail. So this is just a instance, so it's that instance piece that has now been reflected across the entire sphere here. So I can go in there and I can divide this up, just make it a little bit smoother, so just hitting Control+D to divide it up. And if I get out of edit mode there, you can see now I've got this effect. Now at this stage, you can modify your sphere. So if I switch to, say, the Move brush and get a large draw size here, I can modify this. And as you modify this, you'll notice that the nanomesh is going to go with it. So you can make a little chainmail and then start sculpting chainmail monsters. And make them all sorts of crazy things. Chainmail monsters. So anyway, that's a quick way to make chainmail. Now the question was asking about, well, okay, I got this. And now how can I get this to a map? So for this, now my UV mapping on this may be horrible. We just need to have our object, and I'm going to duplicate this. So just make a duplicate version of this, and then make sure that's selected. And I just want to convert this to geometry. So I'm going to go to the Geometry tab here, and I'm going to click Convert BPR to Geo. So it's looking at the nanomesh, all the instances, and it's just going to convert to geometry. So I'm going to click on that. And when you create this, I now should have this part here. So you see I have my chainmail, and then I have my inner sphere. So I need to first remove that inner sphere. So just holding Control and Shift and clicking. And now I can click Delete Hidden. And now I should just have a subtool that consists of just that chainmail. So now I have my chainmail sphere. That is all true geometry. Now I want to append in another sphere. So we're going to append in this sphere 3D. And we're going to hope this one's unwrapped. And I'm going to scale this up just a little bit so it's engulfing through there. And now what I want to do is, so at this point you could export both these out and bake them in another application if desired. You could export out this low res and then export out the high res. I just want to first bake the chainmail details onto this other one, so it gives me the illusion of chainmail, and then I can get a map out for it. So I'm going to make sure my sphere has enough resolution. So I'm also going to rotate this way. There we go. So I'm going to divide this up, just hitting Control D, and I'm going to get up to around 2 million. Now I'm going to do that project option again. So set my distance to 0.1 and do a project all on this. Wait for it. Wait for it. This may take a little bit because my original polysphere is 8 million. But this will be the last one after this, and then I got a log. So hopefully you've learned something today. Maybe not. You never know. And I may run out of time projecting this. Anyhow, so that is how I'd project it. And then after you project this, if your mesh has UVs, you can then grab the normal map from those UVs. You can also grab the texture map from it. And if your texture map, if you set it to, say, flat surfaced, then it will allow you to grab those details well. So it looks like my projection strength was a little bit too crazy, so it didn't get everything. So what you would do for resolving this is I need to bring back that inner sphere, and then that would help me here. This sounds like one that I will need to hit on for the next session of AskZBrush. So I'm going to save this out, and then we'll return back to this on the chainmail sphere of baking. All right, so thank you guys for coming out. And once again, this is AskZBrush on Twitch. And if you have any questions related to ZBrush pipelines or processes, please use the hashtag AskZBrush on Twitter. Once a week, I'll go through and attempt to answer any questions I can with short videos, and then these get posted on our YouTube channel. The current playlist right now is AskZBrush Volume 2, and we're up to about 17 using ZBrush 4R8. And then we also have the AskZBrush first volume, which has 200 videos, which was focusing on ZBrush 4R7. Now, a lot of the questions in both of them will work in 4R7 and 4R8. So if you see one that's in 4R7, it's highly likely that the solution or the answer that is given will also work in 4R8. So thank you guys for coming out, and hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And happy ZBrushing.